Morning, all of you. My name is Bhatia, and this is the class of BHIE 142. And we are going to cover in this class Unit 2 and Unit 3. The timing of uh, BHIE 142 is 1600 to 1868. First of all, before starting the class, I want to wish you today is Shivratri, as I'm going to wish you happy Mahashivratri. And now we are going to start 1600 to 1868 time period. And in Unit 2, we are going to cover early modernity, the Tokugawa period. Early modernity, because we are talking about the Japan economy, Japan intellectuals, and Japan economy and socio-economy and the system of Japan, and the distress and the protest of which held in Japan at that time, and the time period is this. Now we are going to discuss about the Tokugawa period. What is Tokugawa? The wealthiest people in Japan, they connect to a Tokugawa family, because the name, and we are talking about, they are very changed from today's name, because we are talking about the not in India, not about India. We are talking about Japanese names and Japanese culture. Next, we are going to cover in this unit the objectives we are going to cover. That is the nature of Tokugawa feudalism, the administration system, the nature of economy and the culture under Tokugawa rule, and the reasons behind the decline of Tokugawa rule. Now, in introduction, we are going to discuss about the Tokugawa peace based on what has been famously termed centralized feudalism, because they connect to feudalism at that time in 1600s, and nearly that time period. The growth, the economic growth, and the population expansion from somewhere between 12 to 18 million in 1600s to nearly 30 million in the early 19th century. The political system was a balance of power between central government and the Han or domains. Han means domains. Domains means the particular regions. They were connected to Japan. The country was closed to foreigners, and even within the country, the movement of people was controlled, and society was theoretically divided into status groups. In fact, our present understanding of Tokugawa period, what is the present understanding of Tokugawa period, is that it was a vibrant time when the country had contacts with outside world, outside trade, and outside commerce. They were developing. Merchants played an important role as production for the market grow with inter-regional trade and specialization. Political stability spurred urbanization, economic growth, the spread of literacy, making the government increasingly rely on merit rather than status of appointment administrators. These developments supported a vibrant culture. Now, next we are going to cover the Tokugawa Daimyo Han system. Han, I told you, Han means the regions. They connected with Japan. The system instituted by Tokugawa Ieyasu is called Baku Han system, means which was instituted by Tokugawa. That is known as Bakuhan system. This refers to Bakafu or central government. Bakafu means central government, and the Han or feudal domain or fief means the system which is connected to the feudalism or the fief or the domains that were connected. That is known as Bakafu. The political structure established a system dependent on a balance between Tokugawa House and the semi-autonomous feudal fiefs. The Han were allowed a degree of autonomy, autonomy of Tokugawa family, the extent of which is debated by scholars, but regulatory mechanisms kept them within central control. The daimyo or dominal lords were controlled in a variety of ways. Means the daimyo means the dominal lords were controlled in a variety of ways. They were involved in Tokugawa projects that used up their resources. Rules governed marriages, building of forts. They were connected with that. The degree of control exercised by the Tokugawa and the extent of autonomy of the daimyo are still a matter of debate, with some scholars even arguing that the daimyo were quite independent, while others see the emergence of strong regional bonds and transcend the daimyo's domains and lay the basis for the building of a nation state in Meiji period. The Tokugawa house exercised direct power over its own territories, which were over 4 million koku. Koku means 100 kilogram of rice, means the area that is covered with 150 kilogram of rice. What was considered enough to feed one man for a year. Productivity of that area, the tax was calculated in rice, and the daimyo had annual tax revenues of 10,000 koku or more depending on the size of their domain. But that was about a one fourth of land available, and they directly controlled the major cities such as Osaka, Nagasaki, as well as copper and silver mines were there. Their direct retainers, the banner men and housemen, as they were classified, were liable to military service but also meant the administration. Next, we are talking about the categories of daimyo. The three categories were there. The daimyo were divided into three categories, just like number one. The number first category was blood relations. Second was loyal vassals, just like fudai, that is known as fudai, loyal vassals. And third one is those who had opposed the Tokugawa and were considered less loyal to that, means the outside lords, Tozama. The Shinmen means the blood relatives controlled only about 10%, but were placed in crucial areas such as Kyoto, Owari, and Kei, and Echizen. These were the area, those were the areas, they were very crucial areas. They were connected with the blood relatives, means the blood relative people. They were connected to very crucial areas just like Kyoto, Owai, Echizen, these type of things. The Fudai or loyal vessels means the second category, means the loyal vessels. Vessels, the people, they were connected to the particular empire, the particular nobles or king or emperors. We can talk like this. The Fudai and the loyal vessels were given 26% of the land and placed in strategically important positions, and together with those of the Tokugawa house. Their number exceeded that the Tozama daimyo means, and the third one is outside lords. Outside lords means less loyal allies. They controlled 38% of land. This intricate balance gave a high degree of autonomy to the daimyo, but made it difficult for opposition to come together. The daimyo swore loyalty to the Tokugawa house, but in the initial years between 1600 to 1650, many domains changed hands, particularly of outside daimyo, to underline the authority of the shogun and establish his right to over the land. That's why a reward for services like 172 new daimyos were created and 281 occasions daimyos were transferred. And this transfer policy between helped to weaken the links between daimyo and the people of province. During 17th century, over 200 daimyo lost power or all their territory for various offenses. Next one is the system of alternative attendance. The Sankin Kotai system means alternative attendance was another way to control the daimyo. This requirement was formalized in 1635 by Iemitsu, the third shogun. Next is the daimyo had to go to Edo. Edo, present day Tokyo. The daimyo had to go to Edo, the capital, on a regular basis and live there. Means the main people, the main MPs, MLAs, and they connected with the capital and they lived there. Means daimyo. When they returned to their domain, their families were left back as hostage. The back and forth travel required heavy expenditure as daimyo, depending on rank, traveled with between 15 to 300 retainers. They followed designated routes and this led to development of roads, hosteleries and temples and business that supported this movement of people. Next, what was the administration structure of daimyos at that time? How they were working their administration. The routinization of administration gradually weakened the power of shogun, who were sometimes overshadowed by their administrative officials. In the early period of the shoguns exercised power, but from 1666, effective power passed to administrative heads, Grand Chamberlain, subsequently the chief counselors. This was reflection of increasing importance of merit rather than status and the need for a trained bureaucracy to administer and manage an increasing complex economic system. These officials were from the ranks of medium and minor vessels, while the outside lords, the great vessels, were excluded from office. Outside lords means very less confidential people, they were connected, and I think so 38% of the land of Japan was covered with outside lords. The houses which could provide heirs to the Tokugawa house were also excluded from holding office. Officials had concurrent appointment and were also rotated, so one job was carried out by multiple officials. This system worked as an effective system of checks and balance to prevent the consolidation of opposition to Tokugawa rule and ensured that conciliation and consensus were important means of government. The Tokugawa system of administration was at one level a national government and at another a large daimyo government. On one level, national government, and on another level, this was known as the large daimyo government. The shogun at the top oversaw both functions. Okay, the shogun at the top, they saw both functions, means the national government also and large daimyo government also. Next is next we are going to talk about Tokugawa economy. What was the condition of Tokugawa economy in Japan? The Tokugawa economy, while predominantly rural, changed in many crucial ways, just like peace and prosperity, as well as the concentration of samurai in castle towns led to a high level of urbanization. Castle towns means they connected to the rich cities. They were known as castle towns. Means they connected with the church and religious people, and they connected with the so many villages also are known as castle towns. Okay, and the before any industrialization took place, by the end of 18th century, the capital Edo had a population of nearly a million people, and making it one of the largest cities in the world. Edo. Compared to pre-industrial Europe, pre-modern Japan had many large urban centers. The growing demand in cities that led craftsmen and shopkeepers to migrate to Osaka, Kyoto, and the castle towns like Kanazawa, Sendai, and Kagoshima, which had populations of over 50,000. The development of roads like Tokaido and Nakasendo, Senyodo, and Senindo improved commerce and commercialization and communication. Next is urbanization and town center. How Japanese people urbanize themselves and how they enhance the culture of the town in Japan. The town culture which developed was very essentially a merchant-led movement. Means the merchants was having a lot of interest in enhancing the business in Japan, like Kyoto and more cities. The merchants were the early entrepreneurs of Japan. They worked hard and contributed to development of a vibrant social system. In 1627, for instance, Mitsui Toshitsugu opened a small draper's shop in Edo that is known as Ishigaya, which developed into today's Mitsukushi, owned by Mitsui Company. Tokugawa society was far more complex than earlier characterization of it as composed of samurai, farmer, artisan, merchant. They would suggest the Kyuj or nobility. The nobility was a small class confined to Kyoto. The warriors, near about 4 lakh, mostly lived in towns. Hereditary pensions. They lived in hereditary pensions, but many lived in poor circumstances and took up farming, teaching, and some other profession. And some of the merchants grew in wealth, while artisans were mainly in a big urban centers and either self-employed or working for them and rich patrons. The biggest class of farmers were actually a very diverse group ranging from wealthy landlords who were educated and often involved in by employment to poor and illiterate indentured labor. The growth of rural distress and urban poor raised the question of how to tackle poverty. That is very serious issue of that particular time. How to tackle poverty. The city is mostly administered directly by the shogunate, set up relief shelters in mid 17th century. These provided temporary help, after which the people were sent back to their villages. By the late 17th and early 18th century, rural distress led to an increase in the underclass and they became permanent facilities. The scale of help provided can be gauged from the fact that in 1805, about 4 out of 1,000 townspeople in Edo received help. This relief system was sustained by a special tax and managed by wealthy merchants. This was then compared to shogunal benevolence, a more public and sustained relief system than the measures practiced in villages that tended to deal in specific emergencies. Next is Tokugawa intellectual currents. Tokugawa intellectuals. We are talking about intellectuals, just like we can talk in this intellectuals, just like Confucius, like Buddhist, just like Zhu Qi and Zhuanzang, Faxian, Shohiko, Fujiwara, Seika. They were known as monks and they were known as intellectuals. They were connected to that time period. Confucius' ideas were known from early times, but during Tokugawa period, they provided rules for government, for economy, familial relationships, and ethics. These ideas came from the Neo-Confucian schools that emerged in 12th century China to challenge Buddhism. The Neo-Confucian ideas of Zhu Shi were first introduced to Japan by a Zen monk, Fujiwara Sheika, and formalized by Hayashi Razan, who established a school, the Shoheiko, that was named after Confucius' birthplace, changing pronounced Shohei in Japanese. That became the officially sponsored center of Neo-Confucian learning from 1797. Buddhism was strictly controlled and sect kept apart. Births were registered in temple records, so everyone belonged to a sect, and funerals were conducted according to Buddhist rituals. Buddhist temples were rich, but their power limited. Shinto sect also played an important role. Some argue that Buddhist deities were manifestations of Shinto gods. Ieyasu was exalted as a manifestation of Shinto and Buddhist gods. Ogyu Sorai, one of the most important thinkers of this period, Ogyu Sorai, that was linked to this school but differed crucially in that he even questioned the superiority of the canonical text and argued that these texts have to be applied to the new circumstances. Christianity was also an important part of history of pre-modern Japan. It was brought by Portuguese in 16th century. By the early 17th century, there were some 30,000 converts, including people from ruling houses. Christianity also played a very important role in pre-colonial Japan. Culture in Tokugawa, Japan. The government of Japan, they thought a lot about the culture of Japan. One way of thinking about culture is to look at popular and elite cultures. Japanese scholars such as Nakano Mitsubishi have identified courtly culture or aristocratic that was largely influenced by courtly Chinese classical text. Chinese classical text. And this would be classical poetry such as Waka, linked verse, Renga, no drama, paintings of Kano school, tea ceremony. And next is the Zoku or Zoku was a common plebeian culture. This was best represented by ukiyo and the culture of the floating word. Next is they were confined to licensed areas where swords and weapons were not allowed. Swords, weapons were not allowed, and money mattered, not social distinction. The growth of urbanization and economic prosperity fueled the growth in literacy, creation of a large reading public which sustained a vibrant publishing industry. Japan has a long history of printing. In fact, the one of oldest printing text dates back to between 664 to 770. The vitality of Tokugawa culture was sustained and invigorated by a sophisticated printing history. Print culture was a very complex and varied as in Western countries. Every year, some 3,000 new titles were published. They were given to some Japanese people, important intellectuals. This does not include the regular reprints of Chinese and Buddhist texts. And next is at the peak, there were 6,747 publishing houses spread across in the country. Classical Buddhist, Confucian texts, Japanese histories were published alongside plays, poetry, fiction, primers that were connected for reading and writing, as well as a range of single sheets showing leading sumo wrestlers, courtesans, and actors. Theater. Theater was a very popular among all classes. And next is among the visual arts of development of pictures of floating words are perhaps the most distinctive representation of Tokugawa period. The regulation of foreign contact means how they regulate with other foreign contact. The work of scholars such as Ronald Tobey in English has altered our picture of Japan as a closed country to more nuanced view. Japan restricted contacts in the 1630s not because of anti-foreignism or because they did not want to be in a subordinate position within Sino-centric world order. Restrictions on foreign trade in early 17th century were introduced in the particular Japan. They were connected to important cities, important families. Okay, and we are talking about they are connected with depletion of several silver mines, and in this turn led to a currency crisis. Currency crisis they were facing at that time. To stem this flow, the Tokugawa took measures to restrict imports and support domestic silk production. These measures introduced sericulture and the production of high quality silk. Nishijin was a place in Japan they were connected with the silk production over there. Kyoto emerged as one of the major center of silk production. Kyoto. As this domestic production grew, foreign trade declined till ports were opened to foreign trade in 1659. The Dutch trading station if at Deshima. The Dutch were given a small trading station in Deshima. Do you know the Dutch? Just like Britishers, just like Portuguese, just like that, Dutches. The Dutch were given a small trading station in Deshima, Nagasaki. And from 18th century, they began to import books as well. Some Japanese scholars who became interpret for Dutch studied Dutch and became known as Dutch scholars or Rangakusha. They studied and translated books on Western medicine, science, mathematics, and spread this knowledge, new knowledge, in front of all. Their work turned attention away from China as a source of knowledge to West. In 1771, when the Dutch scholar named Sugita Genpaku, participated in dissection of human body, He realized that the Western books accurately showed the working of human body and that Chinese medicine had nothing to offer. His translations communicated these ideas to a wider public, and these type of ideas derived from the reading of Western works, studies of Western sciences. It was only in the end of 18th century that anti-foreignism becomes important. Anti-foreignism, that is very important word, connected very important word. Anti-foreignism becomes important when in the end of 18th century. Japan maintained different relation with foreign countries. Korea regularly sent diplomatic delegations, and Japan traded with China. Books was very important component of trade, and along this, with reports based on information given by captains of ships that came to trade, that became an important source of information about global developments. How the Tokugawa family declined. What was the condition behind the decline of Tokugawa? The decline of Tokugawa order has its roots in a constant contradiction which lay in the structure itself when it was built in the 17th century. The contradiction was between the ideal, which visualized that is the connected with the economy, and we are talking about the decline of Tokugawa, and the Tokugawa was the very wealthier family, and they connected with the government of the Japan. The changes brought about a long period of peaceful development generated such as social, intellectual forces which questioned the undermined the basis of Tokugawa rule. The growth of a cash economy and cottage industries, increased commercialization, led to diffusion of new technology such as better seeds, planting, planting techniques, greater use of fertilizers to increase production. They were using these things, and the commercialization of economy and fairly constant tax means the revenue, tax based because of the Tokugawa bakufu inability to effectively manage the new sources of wealth, and this was the led to financial problems for both the shogun and the daimyo and their samurai retainers. In 1830s, for instance, the domain of Satsuma owned 33 times its annual revenue, and by 1840, Chozu owned 23 times its annual revenue. 33 to 23, the decline of revenue. This deterioration in finances affected the samurai whose incomes were low, even in the 17th century, who were now faced with rising price and inability to satisfy their increasing demands. They were the main reason behind the decline of Tokugawa family. The failure of reforms which they wanted, the reforms which they connected to enhance the commercialization, the economy of Japan, they were failed at that time. The Bakufu had taken recourse to various steps to alleviate these problems, but these measures failed because of the lack of clear understanding of the nature of the problems. In 1705, the Bakufu had confiscated the wealth of merchants, like the rich and powerful Yodoya. But this was of no use. In 1720s, Tokugawa Yoshimune took measures to reform the fiscal and administrative system in which he licensed the merchants, but he also took measures to reduce consumption and money supply and tradition prescription. The only attempt, which was substantially different, was by Bakufu official Tanuma Otitsugu, who sought to encourage commerce and by taxing it raise government revenues. The inability of Bakufu to implement effective and suitable policies was matched by a growing increase in unauthorized trade between producers, local merchants, trade which the domains were forced to accept or even actively support to overcome their own financial difficulties. Next is the Tokugawa economy. What was the condition of Tokugawa economy? And we are discussing about a case of proto-industrialization. The major cities developed, farmers produce a lot of crops, more for market, inter-regional trade expanded, far from being overtaken by commercial developments or not understanding them, officials began to change their policies to encourage and tax this rural production. Susan Hanley, for instance, argues that material life increased. Listen to this, material life increased for the better. Houses were bigger. People ate better, lived longer, even by Western standards in Tokugawa, Japan. If we are studies on the Han of Tosa, it has been argued that the merchants developed the idea of kokueki. Kokueki means the prosperity of country or domain. Public officials incorporated this idea into their thinking, made policies to support commercial activities such as to encourage production of eggs, to encourage production of sugar, paper production, gunpowder. They would reduce or waive taxes for a better period of time to encourage merchants to move into these areas. When they will grow these type of things, they will produce these type of things, then this will give a way to taxes for a period of time. They encourage merchants to move into these areas. Next, the very important thing which we are going to discuss related to famine, distress, and the peasant protest. What were the things they were facing at that time, and what was the condition of peasants at that time? Famine. Famine means the lack of the important substances. The other side of these developments was that there were major famines in 1730s, 1780s, 1830s that led to the death of hundreds of thousands, indicating the precarious lives of farmers. Stratification of rural society and uneven benefits of growth are also reflected in rural protest and peasant uprising, which were in later part of period directed against the rural rich. Peasant rebellions, rich literature around them underline the different ways people benefited from economic growth. The growth of cash economy, consequent changes in social relations, they generated tensions and conflict. Cash economy and the social relation, they generated tensions and conflicts. The divisions within the samurai, the status difference between lower and upper people, and they prevented the formation of a community of interests. The merchants too were not a monolithic block but divided by into their interest. The Osaka merchants favored by Bakufu were closely tied to Tokugawa's structure, and when it collapsed, they too were finished. The rural merchants who had begun to play a dynamic role, the rural merchants who had begun to play a dynamic role were excluded from the benefits of privilege, and they were responsive to the need for change. As in the cities, so as in rural areas to economic changes disrupted the social fabric, disorders became both and increasingly violent. Scholars have calculated that 17th century peasant rebellions averaged one or two a year, while after 1790 they had gone up to over six a year. The early peasant actions had been as village solidarities, largely peaceful and concerned with reduction of taxes. But in the later period, they were often against the advice of village elders, violent and often destructive of property. Peasant protest also evolved at times a millennial character. For instance, even in urban centers, protest increased in last year of Tokugawa. Next, we are going to cover a challenge changing intellectual environment. How the intellectuals had changed themselves with the change of environment. One of the more influential ideas came from National School of Learning, whose influence continued into the modern period. Motori Noringa. Motori Norinaga is one of the major representatives of this school. He studied the Koziki, a text that narrated the divine origins of Japan, its imperial dynasty, to argue against Confucian ideas and assert that Shinto, the ways of gods, was basis of Japanese civilization. These ideas were further developed by Hirata Tusaten and provided the basis for conservative nationalism in modern Japan. Translation of books play showed the danger of colonization of Japanese. An often translated section of a book by Wei Yuan. Wei Yuan was an influential Chinese scholar who wrote on how to combat the West was his chapter on colonization of India. As India was colonized by the Britishers, as they talk about these type of things in his book, Wei Yuan. There were other critical voices arguing against the prevailing political order, the loyalist ideals inspired by imperial institution, which sought to reassert the purity of Japanese culture and at times to incorporate Western technology to reinforce and strengthen these negative concepts were further strengthened by order or intellectual currents. Among the critical voices, perhaps the most wide-ranging criticism of basis for Tokugawa rule was that of Endo Shoeki. Endo Shoeki was a medical doctor by training who went beyond administrating to the needs of the sick to think about what ailed society. Endo Shoeki, who ruled Endo Shoeki was also a scholar who wrote All People Are One Person and advanced an ecological philosophy of nature to realize true autonomy and freedom. Endo Shoiki's major surviving work, The Way of Operation of Self-Acting Truth, that was begun in 1750 and published in October 1752. Shuiki's writings were only discovered in 1899 but became an important text for modern scholars to think about the many ways the Tokugawa order was being criticized. Other thinkers who have critical of samurai class emphasized the importance of merchant traditionally looked down upon. One such person was Ishida Beigan. His ideas draw on national traditional Confucian and Buddhist concept of advance, the idea of heart learning, which taught you have to align your thinking with the universe. The problems of rural distress and peasant uprising inspired ideas about how to alleviate poverty, reduce radical opposition. Next is Sontokyo. Ninomiya Sontokyo was the most famous of philosophers, coming out of prosperous farming family who advocated self-help. Connected to prosperous farming family who advocated self-help. He and other reformers like him preached Confucian ideas of filial piety and diligence, but they did not see the social order and static. One of more influential ideas about how to meet the challenge of West was expressed by Eizawa Sheishe in the new thesis. Eizawa, aware of advances of Russians in North, saw that the strategy that could counter the Western threat required military strength as well as cultural recognition. Next is Sakuma Shozan. He was another influential scholar who had studied gunnery and other Western subjects, coined the slogan, and the slogan was Eastern Ethics and Western Science. This became an important way for people to accept certain areas of this new knowledge, such as in medicine, where the efficiency of vaccination to combat smallpox was evident. Now, let us sum up, and we have covered so many things just like long Tokugawa rule. They saw remarkable changes, transforming the country from a largely rural economy and traditionally status divided society to one where the commercialization of agriculture could support a large urban population. The demand for skilled manpower in economy and administration led to the spread of education and encouraged social mobility. The social and intellectual vitality of country allowed it to respond to the new challenges posed by the threat of Western imperialism. The Tokugawa rulers made unsuccessful attempts to meet the challenges, and ultimately a coalition of domains managed to carry out a relatively peaceful political change, even as they claimed to be restoring the rule of emperor. Now we have finished, we have covered Unit 2, and now we are going to start Unit 3. And in Unit 3, we will read and we will study about the Meiji Restoration and the creation of modern Japan. Earlier, we have studied about pre modern Japan. Now we are going to cover creation of modern Japan, and which objectives we will cover in this unit. We will able to learn about the problem posed by European intervention to the old regime in Japan. The Meiji Restoration of 1868. The role of Meiji Restoration in creation of modern Japan. In this unit, we will look at how the Western powers, starting with Russia, Great Britain, United States, tried to establish diplomatic relations with Tokugawa Japan. These attempts were initially resisted, but soon the Tokugawa regime relented, negotiated trade and diplomatic relations with the US, Great Britain, and other European powers. Next is the coming of the black ships. This incident is very interesting, and we cover in this a very important person named Commodore Matthew Perry. Matthew Perry. In 1853, Commodore Matthew Perry appeared with flotilla. He was, wait a minute, yes. In 1853, Commodore Matthew Perry appeared with a flotilla and he was coming with a ship. His ship were called black ships because coal tar was used to seal the cracks between the planks of the ship. The following year, a treaty of amity and friendship was signed. The Treaty of Amity and the Treaty of Friendship was signed. This marked the culmination of a process which had begun much earlier. The Russians and the British had been pressing on the coast of Japan since the 17th century. The Russians had established themselves on the Sea of Okhotsk, and from there they made exploratory trips. In 1738, Martin Spenberg, a Russian explorer, had discovered a route to Japan. Subsequently, very serious efforts were made to open Japan, and they wanted to establish a relationship with to open trade. In 1792, Lieutenant Adam Lexman arrived in Izo. Izo means modern Hokkaido, but was denied entry and failed to win any consensus to open trade. The next Russian envoy, ambassador, went to Nagasaki, which was the only port where foreigners were allowed. Nagasaki. But the Japanese were not interested in foreign trade at that time. In 1806 and 1807, the Russians raided Japanese ports in Sakhalin and Kuril Island, and this led to tensions and confrontations between the two countries. The British had been attempting to explore this area as early as 17th century. Captain Cook was planning to go to Japan when he died in 1793. The embassy led by Earl George McKenty McCartney to China in 1793 and also failed to go to Japan through McCartney carried letters to the Emperor of Japan. He was later governor of Madras and opposed the East India's trade in opium. In 1797, an English ship went to Hokkaido. In 1808, the frigate Phaeton entered Nagasaki. Means, in this we have studied about Japan. So many countries were interested in going and in trading with Japan, just like Great Britain, USA. Commodore Matthew Perry came from USA to enter in Japan, and he wanted to make treaty, to sign treaty with Japan, to trade with Japan, and Great Britain, USA, Russia, they were interested in entering. China also, they were interested in entering in Japan to trade with Japan. Next is the whaling and opening of Japan. In the 19th century, whaling was fifth largest industry in the US, and whaling ships sailing across the Pacific needed safe ports for refuel and supplies. This, as well as the attraction of China market, led the US to play an increasingly important role in opening Japanese ports to foreign trade. The writer Herman Melville The writer Herman Melville depicts this world of whalers in the novel Moby and Moby Dick, and write about if Japan, the double bolted land, is ever opened, it will be because of the whale ships. The westward expansion of USA in the 1840s, fueled by the ideas of manifest destiny, that it was the destiny of white Americans to rule the native populations, also encouraged US businessmen to try and gain access to China, but this proved futile and the government began to be more interested in Japan. From 1835, attempts were made to conclude diplomatic arrangements. In 1846, Commodore Biddle came to Edo Bay, but he was refused entry. Commodore Glim subsequently went to Nagasaki in 1849, but did not make any arrangements to carry on trade. Further, we will cover the Bakufu and Daimyo reactions to Western demands. Next, we will cover the coming of Matthew Perry. That is very important for the history of Japan. Next, we will cover the steps of the Meiji Restoration, means the distribution of time period, which we will cover in 1853 to 1858, how the Meiji Restoration was started at that time. Next, we will cover, after these time periods, we will cover the British and French rivalry in Japan, because Britishers also wanted to make Japan its colony, just like India. They have made their colony in India. Okay, that's why the British wanted to enter in Japan also, and the France also wanted to enter in Japan. But uh, Japan was successfully negotiate that things for entering the other countries into Japan. Next, we will cover the economic problems and anti-foreign sentiments, how Japan faced economic problems and how Japan faced anti-foreign sentiments. Next, we will cover in our next class the Meiji Restoration. That is very important, and these type of questions will come into your exam. Just define Meiji Restoration in 20 marks. How will you write or for 20 marks? If you will study and if you will read and you will listen the class of this Meiji Restoration, you will able to write the near about 20 marks answer. Next is the significance of 1868, means the Meiji Restoration, the significance when Meiji form of government was there. Next, we will cover the scholarly approach to the Meiji Restoration. So many scholars had played a very important role in Meiji Restoration, and we will read all these things, study all these things. Next is some Japanese views also we will study, just like Tokutomi Soho we have studied. We will study feudal Japan, and after that the labor farmer group and restoration. Those type of things we will study, and after studying all these things, we will came to conclude that things. And now we are going to end this session. Okay, so many objectives we have covered, and now we are going to end this session. And thank you. Have a nice day.